Hello there, and welcome to City Till We Die. Now, first things first, I have already made a video on our YouTube channel discussing a little bit about myself and Adam and what our plans are for the channel. If you haven't watched that video, I will very quickly go over it. My name is Ben Ambrose. I'm a big Norwich City fan, like my co-host here and co-creator of the channel, Adam Harvey. We are here to waffle about Norwich City. If you want more detail, please go and watch that video. Now, Adam, that's the dreaded intro out of the way. The first question I want to ask is, from a Norwich City perspective, how are you? How are you feeling? What's going on in your mind?
Um, I'm still quietly optimistic. I think this summer was obviously a huge change for the football club. The departure of Johannes at the back end of last season, and the sort of upheaval of the squad, and the sort of DNA and the fabric of the football club completely changed with the arrival of Liam Manning, and what kind of a Johannes team looked like is stark contrast to what Liam Manning's trying to build. And I sort of went into pre-season probably uncertain because I think the schedule didn't help them. Obviously, that pre-season was built for Johannes and quite clearly didn't really work for what Liam Manning was probably trying to do. And I was slightly concerned that he wouldn't have maybe had the time, sort of in terms of the sort of pre-season friendlies, to really get what he wanted out of this squad moving into that first game of the campaign against Millwall. And I think we probably saw that to an extent, but certainly within kind of the more recent games. And I was at Blackburn, and I felt that there was a lot more positive signs coming out of that game. So I went into this international break feeling probably more optimistic maybe than I was if you'd have spoke to me sort of after that Middlesbrough game, where I think sort of leaving Carrow Road, everyone sort of had a similar feeling of okay, what's this going to look like moving forwards. But yeah, with another sort of couple of weeks block and a few players obviously away with internationals, but a period of time now for those players to do some more work on the training pitch. Hopefully they can get off to a good sort of positive start to the second part of the season in terms of after this international break away at Coventry on Saturday.
So, myself and Adam, for those watching, listening, whatever, the goal of this, as we discussed before filming, is to just kind of establish where we are, right? And I mentioned in this video that we had, or that I'd previously created, that we are probably going to cross-reference what's happened so far because it feels like a lot in such a short amount of time, as is always the case when you are a Norwich City fan. But the goal is to establish where we are. We've had, as you say, Adam, we've had that international break to kind of digest what we've seen and how we feel, and as football fans do, theorize about what could happen, and then watch what actually happens and it'd be completely different, such is the life. And the structure of the podcast is going to be quite simple. It's going to start with us talking about what's happened, whether it be a big piece of news, a match, I don't know, like a transfer or what have you. We're then going to talk about our talking point, which will often relate to the title, and we'll end it with a bit of a preview to what is ahead. And I hope that is a structure that goes down all right. For us, it should be quite easy to blend the three together. And to be honest with you, I'm very, very excited to talk about today's talking point. But we will start with home form and away form. Again, we have the luxury of hindsight. We have the ability to with cool heads go and think about what's happened from a Norwich City perspective. Adam, you mentioned that you were at the Blackburn game. I've been at the home games. Well, we've both been at the home games. That tone, that feeling. Talk to me about how you view it, maybe, because it feels, I don't want to say stark. There's a stark contrast because I don't think there really is, but there definitely is a difference both in terms of results and atmosphere. Tell me a little bit about that, and maybe, if you can, suggest how that could be remedied.
Yeah, he certainly, well, I say Blackburn was the first away game I've done as a fan in, 4 years. So for me, it was kind of a nice experience, but one that was obviously helped by the result at the end of the day. But the atmosphere in that away end, I think, given there was only, 1,200 fans, was top. The full backing behind the boys for the 90 minutes, even in kind of those difficult moments, certainly in the second half where they sort of came under the cosh a bit, against a team with 10 men who had the backing of their home fans. That can be difficult. I think Norwich obviously kind of had the reverse of that almost against Middlesbrough the previous week, and we sort of saw that they got close, obviously, there in the latter stages to trying to find an equaliser. So yeah, I just think it's kind of a mentality thing. I think away from home, there's almost that freedom at the moment for Norwich to, probably not have that pressure like they do at home. I also think the fact that you look at kind of the teams they've maybe faced at home so far this season, Millwall, under Alex Neil, very established group of players that have sort of been drilled to play a certain way under him now for 6, 7, 8 months. A playing squad that's fairly settled as well. Middlesbrough, okay, they've had the change in Rob Edwards going in there, but the sort of core group of players are primarily the same. And I think a lot of the principles maybe between what Carrick was trying to do there and Rob Edwards, there is certainly some similarities. So you then kind of contrast that to the teams they played away. I know Portsmouth are a lot more settled, but you look at the quality of their squad, maybe relative to those two teams I just mentioned, and it doesn't feel quite so strong. Blackburn, I think, a side that I sort of tipped to struggle a little bit this season. I sort of look at their squad and don't feel it's maybe as good as previous Blackburn teams, maybe under John Dale-Thomason previously, or some of those star players they've had in recent times maybe aren't within that group, particularly when it's a group led by Todd Cantwell. I think that maybe speaks volumes of kind of where that club's at the moment. So, yeah, I think for Norwich now, I'm intrigued to see what the next few home games look like, because they've obviously still got some difficult tests, but against a side like Wrexham, it's obviously not going to be easy. But I think maybe on paper, that's the sort of game that if the Norwich fans are behind them from minute one, and they can almost sort of, I think now it's kind of had 4, 5, 6 games by the time we reach that point to kind of gel and sort of, I think that attacking fluidity that maybe we've not seen within the first couple of home games can try and hopefully come to fruition. And I'm a little bit more hopeful that home form will turn, because clearly away from home they've found a remedy at the moment and a sort of system that works. It's just trying to find those tweaks to how they can maybe get more out of those home games and certainly put points on the board. But I don't know how you sort of view it, Ben, in terms of that.
It's context, as you keep saying, and the main thing, as you rightly say, is it's the quality of the side. I don't think when you actually pick out the characteristics of the performances, or all of them so far in the league, I don't think they're that different. It's just the quality of the teams, home and away. As you said, you've got you've got a very established Millwall, and you've got a Middlesbrough who have hit the ground running under Rob Edwards and continued to cause damage, and did so after beating us at Carrow Road, compared to those away teams. And again, Portsmouth, as you said, they're established, but their goals compared to ours are very, very different. And Blackburn, again, led by Todd Cantwell, really just as a club, it's kind of confusing watching how they're going about things. It seemed like they had something good and almost let it slip. And bizarrely, I really don't know why. I was watching, I think they posted on their YouTube channel a video with Rudy Gestead, their manager, and someone else, just sort of talking about why they made certain decisions. And when you see that kind of content, you think, why are you making that? It's not because you're not being proactive and trying to, justify why you sign people. It clearly is reactive content because there are fans who are quite unsettled and perhaps displeased. And, I can't speak as a Blackburn fan. I don't really know any Blackburn fans, so I can't really give you an in-depth sort of analysis of why that's the case. But again, context for Norwich City and where they are, that really explains why things are the way they are. And I mentioned the word remedied. I don't think there's a massive problem for Norwich City to solve. After the home games, my head has somewhat been a little bit on Mars, but very quickly you think about those key moments. And in my notes in front of me, I want to ask you that question about Manning's perception of the key moments and the opening 30, 35, 40 minute spells of games, in terms of how he's viewed those and why, in his view, they should give us reasons to be hopeful. And the word remedy feels quite strong, but it almost feels like the right one, because, as you say, that bond at the moment, in the very small sample that we've got between the away fans and the team when they play away from home, that's a really tight bond. And you look at the pieces of content that followed Portsmouth, the content that followed almost Watford, but definitely followed Blackburn in terms of, it helped because they won the game, but it really was such a contrast to the social media reaction and the Carrow Road reaction to those home games. And I think the answer is simple. How do you remedy it? You win some games. There definitely have been spells in Norwich matches at home where they've looked decent. The first 25 minutes against Millwall, you sort of start thinking, right, okay, they've got a lot of the ball. They're moving it pretty quickly. They're probably just lacking that little bit of familiarity, that little bit of understanding. Like, for example, I don't know, like when Topic had the ball, we didn't exactly know the run Josh Sargent's going to make, but you think in your head, right, that will take time. And then after that, they just got completely bullied. The same thing happened to Middlesbrough in the sense of they looked okay, silly mistakes were made, and I don't think they completely capitulated. They just completely lost grip of the game, and they did not look like the home team. Whereas away from home, that expectation, it's different, isn't it? In the sense of when you're away, you've not really got anyone to entertain in terms of that whole stadium. You're very much expected, however big as a team you are, you're expected to be on the back foot. You're expected to play quite absorbent football, and especially in the Championship, especially at this level. This is a league that we as fans and Norwich City as a club knows very well. So again, it's that context. I just think at the moment it's just we need to just win a game at Carrow Road, and whether it's like a scrappy, for example, against Wrexham, we're not going to preview that game now, but whether it's like a 2-1 win against Wrexham where from an analytics side we're a bit like, oh, maybe, but we won the game and we can hold on to that idea that actually Norwich City did see a game out. It feels like we need that. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. In terms of your key players, Adam, so far, I've listed 4.
Yep.
Vlad, Darling, Topic, and the main man himself, the ginger god, Josh Sargent. Who are you picking out from those 4? And maybe the wider squad, if I'm being ignorant and missing out some names, who are you picking out as those key players? Because you've got key players as a reason to be hopeful, and you've got those opening spells of home games that Manning mentioned. Who are you picking out and perhaps clinging on to for a bit of hope?
Yeah, I think Topic has been the one for me in that midfield, a player that I feel they've desperately required now for 5-6 years. Someone who's a little bit more industrial, but also has got that technical quality skill set. You sort of look at him as sort of a stature. You don't want to sort of be the sort of running into him, I guess, on the pitch, because you'd soon bump it off him and know that you've ran into him. He just breaks up play. I think also, we've seen some of that neat passing ability that he's got. And I think if you can partner that and sort of almost find the player to suit him, playing next to him, which, hopefully kind of looking around the squad now, McLean certainly gave them that. I felt at Blackburn, the balance felt a lot better there. And it allowed a lot of those attacking players to be a lot more freed up maybe than they have been in some of the other home games particularly sort of even that first game, I felt him and Wright maybe didn't quite complement each other overly well. Nunez, obviously, clearly we probably don't want to talk too much about, but him as a midfielder is a lot more lightweight and sort of doesn't quite have that sort of same characteristics, I guess, as maybe what Liam Manning had at Bristol City. You look at kind of Knight and Bird and their profiles. I think McLean and Topic feel a lot more like that, and that's obviously a remedy that hopefully Liam Manning, if he can keep those two fit and feels that they're the best two to play that, then I'm excited for what that could potentially bring. Obviously, Vlad's proven himself in goal now to be a big game, sort of big moment player, I guess. You kind of look at that penalty save against Portsmouth. That was a key moment in the game, because if that goes in, I think probably inevitably Norwich do maybe crumble in that game and only come away with a point. Clearly that's something they've worked on. I think you kind of look at Johannes and maybe even David Wagner previous to that and some of the other management. I always felt Norwich were never comfortable in the game, whether they were 1-0 up, 2-0 up. It certainly feels under Manning they're a lot more sure, I think, and of what's kind of expected of them, and they don't look as vulnerable, I guess, from those moments. That was probably a moment where I thought, okay, if this goes in, this game changes. But he comes up with a penalty save. Obviously, it was a double save at Blackburn that has been replayed numerous times between now and this international break that's been difficult. I've watched it so many times, and I think that's kind of maybe what they've missed in recent times. Gunn, with the debates being on social media, it's been in the stands, it's been in the pubs. I think fans have maybe got different views on him and what he was good at and what he wasn't good at. On his day, obviously, clearly a top goalkeeper at this level. But I think what we've seen so far from Vlad probably feels like an upgrade for me. I think Harry Darling speaks volumes for what Norwich are trying to do here. In terms of centre-backs, I think he's probably one of the best I've seen. I know it's early days, but 4 games in, he looks on paper everything that Norwich, again, just haven't had for years on end now. Someone who's great on the ball. Okay, there might be that moment where he gets caught or he makes a mistake, but that's kind of comes to be expected, because when you get the good moments, the ability to sort of spread the play, I think some of those long balls, and obviously Norwich are now trying to sort of, I guess, mix up their play a lot more. He's able to do that, comfortable on the ball. An aerial threat as well from corners and set pieces, as we've seen as well in the early parts of the season. And I think someone who could become very quickly a fan's favourite, and it is already becoming a fan's favourite. So with all that, complemented by the man up front, who I know we're going to talk a lot more about sort of as we move through the podcast, and the goals that he's got in him, the most accomplished and best number 9 in the division for me, without a shadow of a doubt. With that blend, it feels like Norwich have got the players, but also I think the key for me this season is actually you look down the squad and maybe the players on the bench, and it feels like they've got a lot more options, and options that fit the kind of the way they're trying to play, and a lot more interchangeable, where in previous times it's kind of been like, oh, if this player's injured, who can play here? And we've got to try and sort of fit this jigsaw together, and it doesn't really fit together, where now it feels like whoever kind of gets put into exposition is capable of playing there. So overall, I think all of the key players that we've mentioned there are proving themselves. I'm hopeful Matthias Gordon could come to the party in sort of coming weeks. I felt as much as he didn't have a lot to sort of say, I guess, in that Blackburn game, there was certainly flashes of what he's about. And I think with another couple of weeks under his belt at Colney, working on some of what Liam Manning wants from him, I'm excited for what that could provide potentially behind Josh Sargent, because I think clearly they're two different players, but players that can work together. So that could be an exciting partnership, I think, moving more forwards as we move through the season.
It's interesting because that list of players, Vlad, Darling, Topic, Sarge, and as you've mentioned there, in terms of like Fiskaren as an example of because he was the marquee signing for me. I think him and Darling, ironically, one was quite expensive, one was completely free. Those two for me were the most exciting. And it's interesting that you mentioned Fiskaren in terms of that potential and what we can wait for. It's just great. And I don't want to get carried away because I feel like I don't want to misrepresent how I feel. But it's nice that you've got so many key players that you can pick from this early with as many problems as we feel like we have. Do you know what I mean? And I think like Jacob Wright is another example. Despite the fact that he played for us from January under Thorup, it almost feels like he's got to become a new player, and we've seen that potential. And again, he if you want to chuck it, if you want to make that list of top 3 signings, he probably would have been in there in terms of making that transfer prominent. I'm just looking at the list as well. You've got Matson as another example. Makama. I don't think I've ever actually had to say his name. But again, it's a nice position to be in. We very much will watch this back in 3 months' time and perhaps laugh at ourselves. But it's a great position to be in. And before we move on, and I want to put a point in, because you a pin in the point that you made, which was in terms of how Norwich have that plan B, almost the long ball, because that will nicely lead us on to the man I want to talk about. What do you think about what Manning said in terms of, he's been very cool and very calculated about it. It seems like that's the sort of bloke he is, and he always sort of came across as that from an outside perspective, but from my perspective, and I'm sure from yours as well, didn't really know too much about him as a Norwich City manager. And I don't think the building is about to burn down, but he has come across as very composed, very calm. What do you think about his feelings of, well, actually at home we haven't been too bad, it's just been sloppy errors? Because you've got that perspective, which I've got one foot in that camp, but then you've also got I don't want you to go into it, and I don't want to go into it. I don't want anyone to go into it anymore. That formation debate, because we can have that at another time. That would make this podcast 2 hours. But what do you make of those comments? And do you, I don't want to dramatize it, but do you buy it to a degree?
I think most of the stuff they've been doing sort of in the middle third of the pitch has been okay. It's kind of been the attacking third and the defensive third that I think their problems have predominantly been. You kind of look at maybe the pressing issues that I think they've had in those first couple of games, where maybe teams have managed to break and catch them quite comfortably on the transition. Also, hampered as well by the mistakes, the decision making at the back. And again, you kind of alluded to the point around maybe players getting on the same wavelength. And I think that was fairly clear to me in the first couple of games that, there's still work to be done there. Medic and Darling, okay, they've played together now for a couple of months if you kind of include pre-season, but they've not really, had that sort of proper test until you get into a championship game against a team like Millwall, who are going to be physical, but also got that ability to, sort of go in behind with a bit more pace, the likes of Aziz and some of the others they've got in those attacking areas that I think will probably be different to maybe what he's experienced, Medic, particularly, in the Bundesliga, where it's maybe not as physical, and also the tactical elements of the game are completely different, and what's being asked of him and expected of him is very different. There's also the back three debate, I'd say, going into the formation stuff. We don't need to sort of go into everything that's been said there, because it's all, I think, quite easy to find on social media and people have debated it. But I think Manning, certainly at Blackburn, maybe it was the first time I felt, okay, he's now starting to make a few tweaks here tactically and formation-wise that clearly worked. I think a lot was made about the formation, but for me, the first few games, you kind of need that consistency just to get the players used to playing a said way and what's kind of expected in a said formation. And I think once you start to evolve the team and players get used to one and maybe understand what's expected of them, I think you can then start to maybe throw curveballs in it and try and play a different way, change the formation. We're starting to see, I say, that long ball a little bit more frequently, which is clearly working. Particularly, I feel it could be a good recipe with Sargent up there, who's obviously got the ability to win flick-ons, and that's why, for me, the likes of Kvistgaard, Diallo, those sort of players could, come to the party, I think, in future weeks, because, they're the kind of players that won't maybe win so many flick-ons, but they've kind of got that ability with the ball at their feet to cause danger, which, Sargent, as we've seen now for 4 or 5 years, thrives off really everything, because I think he's the most complete player in the league in terms of everything he brings to the party. So, yeah, I don't really think there's any need to panic. I think it's still early days, and I don't want to obviously, fans got sick of the word transition, and that's definitely not what this season is, but it still needs time. I think time is fair enough. We've sort of Manning really everywhere he's been. It's always taken him kind of a couple of months just to get things clicking. And that tends to be the way for most managers, really, unless they're going into a club where they're maybe inheriting a group of players that have played together for a long time, and maybe their principles and what's expected of them and sort of those values are aligned, which, clearly Manning and Torrup weren't really aligned on anything, and the group of players have changed a lot. So time's key for me. And that's why I think the international break, as much as they obviously got the win at Blackburn and you maybe want to keep that momentum going, maybe it came at a good time because it's given them a couple of weeks. Majority of the squad have kind of stayed at Colney and worked together. So I'm excited now to see what they can do going to Coventry, where it's going to be a completely different test than maybe what they've had on the road so far.
Yeah, it is just time, isn't it? I think Rome really wasn't built in a day. You've got a manager who, as you say, historically needs that period of adaptation, and you've got almost a brand new squad. You've almost got enough to just make a brand new 11. It just requires patience, and the frustrating part is that if you take the manager out of this, even if, for example, you'd have kept Thorup, it's the same situation. There's a little bit more to build off, but that many signings, as like you look at any club ever, time is required, and for some clubs it doesn't work out. I mean, look at Man United over the last however many years and how many signings they've made. Chelsea to a degree, where they've picked up last season, but like you look at these massive clubs who make loads of signings and things never quite click. It's just, in Norwich City's case, it's not hundreds of millions we're dealing with, where actually sometimes you can buy a bit of quality that will drag you through. Speaking of quality that will drag you through, wow, what a beautiful segue onto Josh Sargent. Josh Sargent, for me, best striker in the Championship. My question to you, best player in the Championship?
I think it's hard. I'm sort of trying to rack through my brain of anybody else. There's players of individual quality, but there's probably players within the league that are better at said attribute than Josh Sargent. But I don't think there's a player who, as complete as he is, who, you can pretty much guarantee he'll provide everything really at a decent level, which is why I was, and still am shocked really that he's still a Norwich City player, moving into this season, at least till January. I certainly wouldn't have put any, if much money on that, if you'd have asked me kind of, end of last season, because he for me, going into a World Cup year as well, where I think there's that expectation that he needs to maybe be playing regularly and probably as high as possible. I felt he would make the move to try and maybe prove himself, because clearly there's that American sticking point, which is still come to the party again in this most recent international break, where he's not scored again. And I think a lot's made of that from the US end, maybe more so than obviously us as Norwich fans who know his quality. And in the system, in a team, in a place he's comfortable and happy in, and he's scoring goals, I don't really think that damages him moving into next summer. If he can prove himself to be the top goal scorer in the Championship, then he's going to get picked for that World Cup squad. So I can understand maybe why, from his point of view, if his family's settled here and he's settled here, and there's not that right move on the cards that he felt was right at this moment in time, then probably best to stick it at Norwich and probably prove himself as the best player in the Championship. And that, hopefully, if he can stay fit this season for the whole year and keep up this form, inevitably there'll be dips and sort of high points and low points throughout the season. But if he can remain relatively consistent, he will become the top goal scorer in the league by the end of the season, and he will have more clubs and probably better quality clubs come to the party next season when it comes to the transfer window. If Norwich aren't promoted back to the Premier League, as I think he will probably expect if he's going to stay another season. So, yeah, I don't think it's really in question at this point. I firmly believe that Norwich, actually, if they'd have recruited him, it would have been the best signing in the Championship for any team. So the fact they managed to keep him, then that point remains the same.
It's a shame, isn't it? Because in terms of his injury history, I find it sad because there has been sort of this recurring ankle thing, but also I don't know if it was the biggest injury or not, but the contact injury against Huddersfield, you're just like, that is just rotten luck. And sometimes when people poke Sargent with the injury stick, my brain is like, well, out of three decent injuries, one of them is contact, and it's just like, I don't know. There's almost that element of feeling a little bit sorry for him, but also you look at the US men's national team thing, and we had a conversation, didn't we, off camera, in terms of how social media doesn't represent the wider footballing world. It just represents what a few people online think, and to lean on that a little bit, the social reaction from a US men's national team perspective is that he isn't that popular, and it continues to and will always blow my mind in terms of the player we watch on a regular basis. And as you say, so complete, so great to watch. In my head, I was debating whether to say it. I might as well, because why the hell not? It's almost as if you've combined Timu Pukki and Grant Holt. Maybe not so much to the we'll see this season the quality of finishing that Pukki had, but you've got a player who's incredibly quick, incredibly powerful, incredibly strong. You've got I always think he has been really good at dribbling. I think his technical ability on the ball from day one impressed me as a striker. As a winger, maybe you'd say it's a bit below average, but from a striker, you never expect the technical feat that he has always possessed and is continuing to develop. And in the Championship, his goal scoring record speaks for itself. 49 goals in 102 Championship games for what has been very bang average sides. The bloke is absolutely outrageous. For me, as an ignorant Norwich fan, the best player in the Championship. It's an interesting point you make in terms of the qualities he possesses in his position compared to those of another position. I don't care about the other position. I don't care about the other players. He is very comfortably the most rounded striker in the Championship. And I mean, you look at, well, the three EFL divisions below the Premier League, he definitely is the best. And I mean, his finishing this season has been really good. He's had that almost variety of goals in terms of, you look at the Middlesbrough finish, really tidy, really nice technical finish that actually you wouldn't have expected from him 2 or 3 years ago. You've got the header versus Portsmouth, physical, powerful. You've got the tap in, I say tap in, that's a very loose use of the phrase tap in, versus Watford, where that's like Timu Pukki play. Do you know what I mean? You've got such a wide variety of goals from such an impressive player. Kenny McLean said it. We have got the best player in the Championship. And sort of when preparing to make this point, you look at, and do you know, it also would be wrong to not mention that today. So we're recording this on the 11th of September. Today he was nominated for Player of the Month, or yesterday, whenever it was, nominated for the Championship Player of the Month, which, you know, compared to the competition, you've got Ross McCrory and Victor Torp and Sorba Thomas, which when you look at their stats, it's like, wow, actually these guys have all played really well as well. But when in your mind it's a no-brainer that it's Sargent, that really speaks to the level that he is currently playing at. And it's just that style of play. And the thing I think about when it comes to Sargent, and I'm glad because there's actually receipts of it. If you go back onto an older YouTube channel that I ran, you will see that when Norwich got relegated, I very proudly pointed out that I think he's got the qualities to be a great striker. You think back to that open goal versus Brighton, where again, it was very early in the season, but we're all just like, what competition has this bloke won to become a Premier League footballer, compared to the way we rely on him. And I'm trying to think of which is the best. Let's say the latest goal Norwich have scored, that goal versus Blackburn, where he's just absolutely smashed it, similar to Stoke last season. You compare those two players, and you just think, blimey, what a job he has done, what a job he's doing, and what a cult hero he has established himself as. He is very comfortably in the Pukki Holt conversation, very comfortably. I would love for the bloke to get promoted with us and go and score 12, 13, 14 in the Premier League, because then he'd have excelled Pookie and Holt, and I think Holt's was 15, wasn't it? But you get my point. But also, it's the other side of the game. It's the value of keeping him. It's the professionalism. Two names that really aren't loved around the Norwich City sphere. You've got John Rowe and Marcelino Nunez. You've got those two examples of that is not how you do it. That is not how you approach it. Two players who actually had established themselves as I say, cult heroes, really went about it the wrong way. You look at Sargent, who is very clearly better than those two, and how he's dealt with it, and the comments he's made, and again, that move to Wolfsburg was on the table, but it was rejected because actually he's got a head on his shoulders that can think straight. It's just, yeah, I absolutely love him for obvious reasons, but also genuinely just because he just seems like a great bloke, and he is also a fantastic age. He's what, 25, 26, so he's yet to reach what historically have been described as the prime years, and there's that fire within me that really, really hopes we can get up to the Premier League with him as our leading number 9, and he could almost be what the prophecy said Adam Eder would be, which would be really nice. And yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to add on Sargent? Because I've definitely just gobbled up all the points from the list, but
Yeah,
I just love him.
I think your point around like his development for me as well, it's even more testament to him because you look at kind of, I guess the flux that Norwich have had over recent years, the change of managers, the change of style, the change of system, the change of expectation. When he signed for the club, obviously Norwich were a Premier League team under Daniel Farke. Initially, obviously he was playing second fiddle to Teemu Pukki, and that remained the case for 2 years really, and he was maybe having to play out of position on sort of the wider, positions. He was maybe then being pushed into that sort of central striker role when there was injuries. And I think we're seeing that a little bit with Sienats now, where maybe you just don't ever get that momentum and kind of the understanding of a certain role and what's expected of you as a young player who's stepping foot into England for the first time. He then obviously had Dean Smith, where the style of football, we can debate that all day long. But again, having to still manage to score goals in that system, you then move forward to David Wagner. And again, fans were critical of his way of playing, but Sargent scored goals in that. And he was pivotal in that second half of the campaign in the playoff season, where his goals basically single-handedly propelled them in there. You then move forward to Torrop, where it was a lot more free-flowing. And I felt we maybe saw the best of Sargent in that sort of team. Obviously, Norwich leaked a lot of goals, but there was a lot of chances for him and he scored a lot of goals. And again, injury sort of curtailed that a little bit. And, Norwich is obviously in the second half of last season were, a shadow of themselves really. And he had to kind of come into a team then that was, just treading water really and waiting for the end of the season. And now under Liam Manning, again, a complete change of system, different group of players. And yet we're getting the same outcome, if anything, more consistent than we've ever seen before. So that's what for me is the most impressive about him as an individual, is his ability to adapt to different situations, different managers, different teammates, and we're still getting the same outcome, which is why I think he's proven himself now to be a top end championship striker and someone who's ready probably now to maybe make that move up to the top flight, wherever that might be, and prove himself there, because I think he's developed so much that he's now got everything he needs as a player to thrive in a top league. And hopefully that, as you said at sort of the top there, that's with Norwich in the Premier League leading the line, because I think he, you contrast what he was in the Premier League to what he could potentially be, and they're vastly different now. And I would absolutely love it for him as a bloke for all the reasons you outlined in terms of his professionalism and just him as a character, and his leadership as well, which I think goes under the radar sometimes, leading from the front in difficult moments. Still a relatively young player, as much as he's 25. He's still a young player, probably in football terms. To have that skill set is a credit to him. And yeah, the longer that Norwich can keep hold of him, the better chance they have of getting back to the Premier League.
Well, there was 2 questions, wasn't there? There was, can they keep hold of him? And if they can keep hold of him, can they keep him fit? Yep. They've kept hold of him. One question remains: can they keep him fit? And the question of will he, can he continue to provide? Yes, he can, because he's doing it, as you said, in a Norwich City squad that doesn't really know his strengths at the moment. You look at the goals that he scored. You've had a long throw in, a cross, and it really feels like there's still that potential to just almost in our heads when we see Norwich in a certain position go, right, here comes a Sargent goal. Like, for me, that will come. It came with Teemu Pukki, and that little magician Emi Buendia was the catalyst of that. And it really feels like that will come for Josh Sargent. Who that player will be, well, I think it'll be multiple players. Who that will be is exciting, because regardless of how Norwich do for the rest of the season, I do think it'll happen. And it is massively something that I very much look forward to seeing unfold. And yeah, just a message from us, Josh. We love you, mate. We absolutely love you. Moving on from Josh Sargent, before I gush anymore, Coventry away, Norwich City going forward. It almost feels like you don't even have to reference Coventry specifically to talk about how you want to approach that game and how we want Norwich City to, because that first international break's always such a, it's the same thing every year, isn't it? Of you have a little sample to go off, but also you then, regardless of where you are, you have that optimism of actually, yeah, do you know what, we've got over 40 games left to excel, to fix this, to continue at where we are. Coventry away, to be specific. So Saturday, 3 o'clock. Coventry's recent form, for those who don't know, they drew at home 0-0 to Hull, beat Derby 5-3 away, which just stinks of Championship football. A 7-1 home win to QPR and a 2-2 draw away to Oxford. It feels like I can just picture that in FM. Do you know what I mean? Like just being Coventry and just Lampard is just living the FM dream. How do you feel about that? Because we mentioned it off camera again, and I literally said to you, I was like, oh, I didn't quite actually realise how good Coventry were. And you look at last season, you base, at this stage of the season, you always base things off the previous seasons. And Coventry are one of those very few clubs that have had that continuity over the off season. And Frank Lampard recently linked to West Ham. I don't know how strong those links were, but clearly he's doing something right and I appreciate the name, but actually he must be doing something right to get those links. How do you feel about that, given their context of their season and Norwich's away performances so far?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how, I guess, Liam Manning approaches it. Does he make any more tweaks to that team that was, it worked at Blackburn? Obviously, they're a completely different side to what Coventry are. Coventry a lot more attacking, a lot more free flowing. Obviously, top goal scorers in the Championship, and I think their evolution is kind of similar to what I see Norwich are trying to do now. Kind of go back 3 or 4 years ago, they obviously lost out in that playoff final where they had obviously a couple of real stars, Gus Hamer, Victor Gyökeres, Callum O'Hare, and gradually each one of those has kind of been picked away and sort of moved further up the food chain. And they've sort of recruited, and you look at them maybe on paper now, and I don't sort of see those star individual players, but collectively under a manager like Frank Lampard, who just seems to have got them well drilled. Clearly he's a manager, I guess you would respect, for what he's done in the game. And I think he's maybe different to some of those other sort of big name managers that, have played well or been at a top level and gone into management and it's not really worked. I think he's obviously done it the harder way and sort of had to work his way up and had difficult moments and had, good moments and clearly found Coventry a place where he can imprint what he wants to a team of individuals that collectively just seem to work together. And I think that's kind of how I see Norwich trying to evolve a little bit now. You kind of look, 3 years ago, it was Gabby Sarah, it was John Rowe. They kind of got taken. It's then Borja Sainz last season. You kind of look at all of those individuals and collectively now it feels like Norwich are trying to move towards that where maybe they don't have as many star players in inverted commas, but they collectively work better as a unit. And I see that with Coventry. And they've managed to kind of get that right balance between the defensive side. Okay, they've shipped a few goals this season, but defensively they have a solid base stereotypically. And then they've got that attack and fluidity and also those quality players in the centre of the park in Victor Torp, who obviously, as you mentioned, has been nominated in that sort of Championship Player of the Month debate that's obviously going to find a conclusion, I guess, by the end of the week. So it's going to be a difficult test. Norwich notoriously have done quite well against Coventry over sort of the last decade or so. I think they're unbeaten. It's a place that the CBS Norwich have enjoyed going to it in recent times. There's always been goals between the two. I'd imagine that will probably remain the case on Saturday. I can see plenty of goals between the two of them. But yeah, it's a different test to what they've faced on the road so far. So I'm intrigued to see kind of how Norwich navigate that. I think they're going to have to probably battle some difficult moments probably quite early on. I can see Coventry coming out of the traps very quickly, and Norwich are maybe going to have to weather that storm. But I feel they're probably better placed to do that now, where maybe last season or previous seasons and different kind of versions of this Norwich group, I would have feared a lot more that they would have, piled under that pressure and crumbled. Where this group, it feels like they've probably got that capabilities to soak that pressure up a little bit more. And when you've got the quality in those attacking areas, as we've mentioned, particularly the main man in Josh Sargent up front, then I think you'd back them to try and find a goal or two. So I'm excited for the game, looking forward to it. And I think it's kind of a good measure, I guess, of some of the games that are then coming over the horizon, where, again, they're going to face different types of teams, but some difficult games amongst that sort of next block of 5 games that's on the, quickly coming around the corner, I guess, before the next international break.
They've got some real quality, Coventry, and as I said, we mentioned Lampard, didn't we, in terms of actually just from his name and stature and actually the reputation he deserves and has earned, how that can encourage performance. Because we saw it literally last season. He went into Coventry and things got off to a little bit of a, dare I say, a rocky start. Maybe a bit harsh to say that, but then they propelled, didn't they, just very quietly into the playoffs, and were quite unlucky to not get through to the final. To obviously the team who then went on and won the whole thing. But there are names on there like Matt Grimes and Jay De Silva who actually probably haven't been standout players, but that speaks to the quality of the players who have been good. For the third time, we'll mention Victor Torp. You've got Milan van Uwijk, 3 assists, leading the way in assists this season. I think he's a right back, isn't he? Linked with an 8-figure move to Wolfsburg. Who else did that? Apparently, good players in the Championship don't want to go to Wolfsburg. You've got Haji Wright as well, who scored 12 goals and 27 last season before he was sort of blighted with injury. 4-4 this season. Unlucky to not be called up to the USA. I don't quite know why that was. And then again, you mentioned that physical aspect, that sort of stereotypical Championship defence of Liam Kitching and Bobby Thomas in the middle. How will Norwich battle with that? Because against Millwall, where it was 2 very physical centre-backs, who was the really tall one? Liam Cooper. Like, just bog standard Championship fodder, just bullying you. Like, how will Norwich compete against that? And what I hope is for, ironically, a performance like we saw last year against Coventry away, where, well, I hope for better, obviously, but I would definitely take that scrappy victory where we leave thinking, yeah, we deserve that, and we were up for the fight. And clearly for that team last year, that was very uncharacteristic and maybe set a bit of a false precedent. Whereas this year, after 3 away games, maybe that is the style that they're going to take away from home. And yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. And I don't know, in this sort of game, I think it could swing either way, in the sense of, you've got Norwich City just being in the Championship automatically means to anyone who exists they should be in the playoffs, and you look at the Coventry history as of late and it suggests maybe they should. So from a neutral perspective, it could be quite interesting, could be a boring 0-0. We don't know. It's, yeah, I don't really think I have any specific views in terms of how I want Norwich to look. I'd very much like it to be, in terms of the lineup, the same as Blackburn away. It's the characteristics of the performance that I'm interested in, as opposed to system and the more tactical nuances. That's sort of what I look for as a fan, in terms of, one, cut out the silly errors, but 2, dig in. Pull some shirts, like pinch some bottoms. Do you know what I mean? Like, do perform the dark arts, as was once described by Tom Cleverley last year. Like, you've got to do that to get where you need to be in the Championship. And I look at this squad. You look at the spine of the squad, in the sense of, you've got Big Vlad, who is just crazy. You've got Harry Darling and Medic, who have the potential to be quite a formidable relationship. We saw the improved Medic, didn't we, in terms of, one, his passing range, bonkers, but also the way that he wasn't exposed in the formation, that really helped. And then you've got Topic in the middle, who will hopefully be complemented by, at some point, Matson, McLean, or Gibbs, whoever that might be, and then Sargent down the middle. Like, there is so much potential there for Norwich to be that ugly Championship team who can play football as well. Again, we can use the word potential not in a tongue-in-cheek sense, because of how early and how not very far into the season we are. But there is definitely something there to be hopeful about. And then it will go on to, can we follow it up against Wrexham? But let's just focus on what's in front of us. Any other points to add before we wrap up? Because I feel like we've covered some decent ground. I feel like we've established who and what we are as fans, and how we think. But is there anything off the top of your head that you want to chuck out there as a sign off?
I'm just glad it's the international break's over, I think.
There's another one in 4 weeks, isn't there? Yeah.
There is, yeah. And then we get another one not long after that, the joys of international football. But yeah, I think competitive football, you can't beat it, clearly, and I think now we can be more excited for this next block of games. than maybe we could have been at the start of the season, where there was still all those sort of early issues. The transfer window's open. The future of Josh Sargent is still a little bit up in the air, and that concerns are still there. Now we've got a settled team. We know what it's going to look like till January. Liam Manning's had a month. They've got a couple of decent wins on the road. So fingers crossed, the remedy's kind of there, and they found solutions maybe to some of their problems in those first few games. And we're going to have an exciting sort of few games before the next joyful international break, which is in about a month's time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to compare the discussion that we have in 4 weeks' time. And one thing I do think we have as Norwich fans at the moment is you've got a Norwich City squad who are willing to go to war together. I feel like we had that anyway, but you look at that Nunes transfer. Personally, I think that is the kind of event that will galvanise the squad. You saw the Sargent celebration. I don't think Sargent is a particularly emotive player in the sense of you don't look at him as like perhaps like Borja Sainz, where he's over emotional. If he's reacting like quite, I don't know what the word is, like quite dramatically to something, then you know something has happened, whether it be to a foul or whether it be like a goal, or like when he took his shirt off when we beat West Brom at home last year. And he'll only ever do something like that when it's worth it. And the patting of the badge produced the greatest photo ever. And when he leaves, I'll cry myself to sleep. But that kind of experience and those actions, again, after all the away games, but especially Blackburn, it really feels like we've got, at the very least, which is something we've been dying for years now. It feels like we've got the most likeable Norwich City squad for I don't even know how long. I mean, you could have chucked the COVID lot into that, but at its best, there was 2,000 people there watching. So, and I wasn't one of them. So I don't know. It feels like positive things are ahead. God, I hope after all of this there are positive feelings after. I don't want to say God, I hope we win, because it doesn't all depend on a win for Saturday. But we'll see. We'll see, and after the match we'll dissect it together. But also, so you're going, aren't you, Adam?
I am indeed, yeah.
And I'll drop a little review after the game, and we'll sit down, we'll discuss, and hopefully laugh about a nice 3-0 win away from home against Frank Lampard's Coventry City. But yeah, going forward, match reactions, podcasts, views, news, all of that lovely stuff. I'm trying to think. We don't have any socials at the moment. We don't quite yet have the capability to go live. These are all things we're quietly working on. They'll pop up when they become relevant, but all of that to look forward to. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, please do. If you don't, fair enough, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.